probably heard a story like this before. One of history's absolute legends, a guy they called the Lion of the Sea, stumbles upon a lost European explorer and just like that opens up the sea route to India. I mean, it's an amazing story, right? But what if I told you the real story? The truth behind the legend is actually even better.
So let's set the scene. It's 1498. The famous Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama. He's done the impossible. He's made it around the Cape of Good Hope. But now, he's stuck. He's just stalled out on the east coast of Africa, staring at this huge, intimidating Indian Ocean, and he has no idea how to cross it. The entire fate of his epic voyage is literally hanging by a thread.
And then, or so the story goes, a savior appears. And not just any savior. We're talking about Ahmad Ibn Majid, the most famous, the most legendary Arab sailor of his day. This guy was a master of navigating by the stars. He knew the monsoon winds like the back of his hand. He was the one person on Earth who could get da Gama ships to the incredible riches of India's Malabar coast.
And this version of the story, it's been told over and over and over again for centuries. It's just so simple and clean, right? It makes Ibn Majid this really important character, but still just a supporting character in what we call Europe's Age of Discovery. And honestly, it seemed totally plausible. I mean, his reputation alone, they called him the Lion of the Sea for a reason. He was born into a family of famous sailors. Navigation was literally in his blood. By the time he was just 17, he was already captaining ships. His name was an absolute legend all across the Indian Ocean. So yeah, if anyone was going to be the guy in this story, he was the perfect fit.
Okay, but as good as that story sounds, as perfectly as it all fits together, when you start to look at the actual evidence, well, that's when the whole thing starts to unravel.
So you have to ask yourself, right? Did the greatest Arab navigator of the 15th century, the Lion of the Sea, was he really just a pilot that some Portuguese expedition hired for a single trip? The historical records, they point to something else entirely.
All right, so here's the first big problem, the first big crack in the legend. You go back to the primary sources, the actual journals from da Gama's voyage. And yeah, they definitely mention hiring a pilot in a place called Malindi. But here's the thing. They never say his name was Ibn Majid. In fact, they say the pilot was a Gujarati from India, not an Arab at all.
And then there's just common sense, the age thing. In 1498, Ibn Majid would have been about 70 years old. 70! Now, no doubt he was still a master. But think about it. Undertaking that kind of brutal open ocean voyage on a strange ship, most historians today are pretty convinced he would have been way too old for that.
So when you put it all together, it's led to this huge shift in what historians think. To consensus now, that whole story about Ibn Majid guiding Vasco da Gama, it's just a myth. It's folklore. And the worst part is, it's been hiding a much more interesting truth this whole time.
Okay, so if he wasn't da Gama's pilot, then who was the real Ahmad Ibn Majid? Well, it turns out his actual story, his true legacy, is so much bigger and more important than that little legend ever gave him credit for.
Look, this guy wasn't just some navigator. He was basically the living library of generations of seafaring knowledge. He wrote nearly 40 works on the science of the sea. I mean, he was so respected that hundreds of years after he died, sailors were still saying prayers in his name before they set sail. That's a legacy.
And his masterpiece, this book he wrote in 1490, it wasn't just a map with some directions, no way. It was a full-blown encyclopedia. It had everything. Star positions, monsoon wind patterns, the deep science behind celestial navigation. It was basically the textbook on how to sail the Indian Ocean.
And to really get how amazing Ibn Majid was, you have to understand the actual science he perfected. We're talking about a system of navigation that was light years ahead of what most Europeans were using back then.
So you can forget about those big, clunky astrolabes. The ones that were basically useless on the deck of a rocking ship. The go-to tool for Arab sailors was something called the Kamal, and it was brilliant. Super simple, elegant, and unbelievably effective for figuring out your latitude. The way it worked seems almost too simple, but it was incredibly precise. Okay, so imagine this. The navigator holds a string with a bunch of knots on it in their teeth. That's their fixed reference point. Then they pull the cord tight and line up this little wooden board so its bottom edge is on the horizon, and the top edge is pointed right at the North Star. Now here's the genius part. Each knot on that string wasn't just random.
Each one was pre-calculated to match the exact latitude of a specific port. It took this abstract idea of where you are on the planet and turned it into a simple physical thing you could do, over and over again, perfectly, even on a rolling ship. It's just brilliant.
In this level of precision, it wasn't just for finding your latitude. No, it went way deeper, into how they even understood direction. So while European sailors were basically working with a simple compass rose, north, south, east, west, Ibn Majid's work lays out this incredibly advanced system. It's a wind rose that breaks the horizon down into 32 different points, or rums. This is way beyond just 4 directions. It's a full 360-degree map that combines wind patterns and star locations, letting them make these tiny, super accurate adjustments to their course.
When you actually look inside his book, you start to see the true scale of his genius. Calling him a pilot is like calling Einstein a math tutor. He was a scientist, a historian, and a geographer. He was literally documenting the entire known maritime world of the Indian Ocean.
So all of this brings us to the big question, right? Why does any of this matter? Who cares if we separate the man from the myth? What do we actually gain by digging up his real story?
Well, for one, it matters because he knew the difference. You can read it in his own words. He writes about the scientific, astronomy-based navigation of the Arabs and compares it to what he saw as the much simpler compass and guesswork methods of the Europeans. His system wasn't just a job, it was a science. It was built on centuries of deep knowledge.
And that's really the heart of it. That's his real legacy. The myth, it shrinks him. It makes the Lion of the Sea a footnote, a sidekick in a European story. But the reality, the truth, it puts him right back where he belongs, as the titan in the global history of science, the undisputed master of his own massive, interconnected world. And that's how he's being remembered more and more today. Not for the guy he supposedly gave directions to, but for the incredible body of work he actually built. His real legacy is the knowledge he saved, the science he pushed forward, and the countless sailors he guided through his words. You see, by pushing back on one simple story, we ended up finding a history that is so much richer and more complex. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other huge, important truths about our world are just hiding right under the surface of the simple stories we've been told our whole lives?